fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
All right, welcome back into the House of Mystery, and we are at the interview part of the show. Joining us today, we've got horror author Mark Matthews. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Mark, so where did it all start for you? I don't mean when you were born, but where did it all start for you to actually sit down and write something and want to turn it into a book?
Well, I think I wanted to write ever since I was in high school, and writers were kind of my heroes and who shaped me, and literature really made a big impression on me. I wanted to be Jack Kerouac growing up. That didn't work out too well. But, I didn't really. I wrote creative writing in college and some in high school. It wasn't until about 30 years old that I really said, I'm going to write a novel, and it took me over a year to write, and it was pretty terrible at first. I had some people edit it, and learned a lot about the process and mimicked people who I saw doing what I wanted to do, and it's become kind of a hobby / obsession. So,
yeah, no, I understand. I think we both do here, but just when you. But what was it that gave you the confidence to actually decide to publish that first book when you were 30? Like, was there something you felt you needed to talk about?
I think I think the best way to learn about ourselves is through stories, and I felt like I have a way of writing that is usually better than I can talk. So I just feel like it impacted me so much, and that I had something to say, and I've become a little bit better at it over time. And I think literature and art is a reflection of the human experience, and so I wanted to put what I had out into the pool of art out there.
So what made you choose the darker side of writing? Like, was there something that influenced you?
Yeah, I mean, a whole bunch of things. I grew up loving horror. I wanted to shout out to my deceased brother, who I think got me into it, and mostly horror movies, but also horror fiction. And when I look at it, I don't necessarily like being scared. I think I myself was scared, like a scared little boy, and watching horror made me say, like, this makes sense to me. This is the world I'm living in, and it was a face to kind of what I was experiencing, and it was kind of a metaphor through things I was going through myself. And so when I started to write, people really said, wow, that's some dark stuff, and I'm like, that's just what's inside. And I'm a pretty fun-loving person and pretty cheerful and happy, but when I write, that's just kind of what comes out, and I think it comes natural to me. So it's kind of cliche to say, but I don't think I write horror. I just write what I like to write, and then because of the way it comes out, it's called horror. Maybe magical realism, I like to think of it.
So you like to incorporate fantasy with it?
Yeah, oftentimes it's supernatural to some degree, but I think with always, I love the phrase that best way to tell the truth is through a story. So with the truth magnified and heightened, and to adding the supernatural or darker elements, then it becomes horror.
Well, that's interesting. So do you have experiences with supernatural or paranormal yourself to draw from, or is it just something you you just add?
Not a ton of experiences. There's one moment I remember as a little kid, and I was sleeping in the basement. It was a sleepover, and it was so dark down there, and I was all sorts of noises. I was afraid to move, and I thought, I'm in hell right now, and I can't move, or the monsters will know I'm here. And I just sat there under the blanket for hours, and I've been writing about it ever since, I guess. But no, I don't. I'm nothing major supernatural, other than odd coincidences or things like that. So,
Well, it's interesting. A lot of times when people have that part of into their writing, they seem to have some sort of experience, or some sort of ghosts or something, going on somewhere in their life. That's interesting. So, but how do you come up with the storyline? So you've got a newer book coming out. Let's focus on that. So what's the newer book? It's the Hobgoblin.
The Hobgoblin of Little Minds, right. And comes out on the 28th. You can pre-order it now, should you wish. And it is, if you've read any Ralph Waldo Emerson, you'll recognize the quote. It's from the quote saying, "Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds," and it's a theme throughout the novel. A lot of them come from setting, and the setting of that is a nearby abandoned psychiatric facility, Northville Psychiatric Hospital. It was demolished about a couple of years ago, but it was legendary in our area. It was where teenagers went and trespassed, and if you look, there's all sorts of YouTube videos on about it. And so a lot of times it's from a setting. And in this case, though, I think it was more about the premise. The premise is that there is a doctor who, because of her own wounds, feels that mental health and mental illness needs to be treated differently. And with bipolar patients, she decides that their mania needs to be harnessed instead of medicated and minimized, and that it's basically a strength. It's sort of like Split, kind of the premise in Split, where you saw that movie. And basically the medications turn them into something similar to werewolves. The W werewolf word is never used, but and they don't grow hair. They grow strength. They grow, and the characters in it are all very sympathetic with the theme of mistreatment in mental health industry, and the complications of taking medications. And the main character is this young adult who misses her dad. And the last place he was at the hospital while she's trespassing in there right before it's about to get demolished, and finds that he's still there, but not what she remembers. So that's the premise. And it's been getting pretty great reviews so far, and I'm hoping that it does well.
Is there something beyond or underneath this story that you're trying to get across to readers, other than what you just talked about, the premise of being the hospital and the doctor and trying to manipulate the moods and stuff like that? So, but is there something that you want them to walk away with?
I want them to get an idea of what it's like to A, live with a mental illness, and B, be a family member of one with mental illness, and some of the complications of medications, because I work in the field, so that's part of why it came to me, is so many people do not like to take their medications, but there's reasons behind it, because you feel that you lose your personality, you feel like, and there's side effects, and then there's family members who are relying on you to take your meds so that you can be stable, but then they feel like their whole life is gauging the temperature of your mood. So they trying to figure out if that day is going to be safe or not. So it just really gets into the family of what it's like to live with somebody who is suffering and to be that person. So, and I think, what better way to tell such a story as through a work of horror.
Well, so in a way, you're sort of saying it's horrific having the illness, or is it the dealing with the illness that you think's horrific?
Yeah, I mean, I think Horrific kept me. I think the challenges of it maybe is better, but that there's a lot of darkness that you have to live with, and but in the novel, the characters, diagnosed with it, they're certainly not the monsters. They have children. One goes back to her childhood home to live where she misses her dad, and every full moon she goes through a transition. So I try to humanize all of it. And to do that, I did a lot of research and read a lot of works and got some beta readers who had a lot of investment in the in the mental illness and the field. So,
Do you think that mental illness is not being treated properly in our world today? Or
well, I think people, as I say in the afterword, because there's a lot of tough situations that come up in the work that doctors do care, therapists do care, they're doing their best. There's not some insidious plot to harm them, but there are so many challenges in doing it right and in doing it human that it definitely needs some revamps. And I'm sure someday, 50, 100 years from now, what we're doing now will be looked at as so archaic, the same way we look back at the way, individuals were treated 100 years ago.
Yeah, there's always a growth in something like that, isn't there? And how we treat each other. Well, there should be anyway, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It doesn't always seem that way. But definitely there is something. Well, that's really interesting. So where do you draw the characters from? Are they from people you know, friends, family, or are they just from absolute strangers, or are you the kind of guy that is laying in your bed and it just comes to your mind?
Sometimes I'll realize after I wrote something that the character was somebody in my life, and subconsciously, I realized after I wrote a book about, it's called Body of Christ, and it's about somebody is next to somebody on life support, and this girl imagines her mom talking to her saying, save me, don't pull me off this life support. And then I look back, I'm like, that was me and my brother. and I didn't fully realize it at the time. And incidents like that happen, or it's situations where I put multiple people together. I write a lot about addiction and other things that I witnessed either firsthand or in my work. I deal with a lot of tough stories and challenging situations and people at in some real distress. So it's naturally what kind of comes out when I write characters.
So do you feel often like when you're doing these stories, it must be pretty draining. It must be pretty like you talk about some pretty dark subjects, and they seem to be very personal as well. Like they're coming from a part of who you are, some of your own challenges and growth maybe. So is it really, how long does it take you to do one of these books?
Man, Hobgoblin, I started the premise like 5 or 6 years ago, but I kept putting it aside and coming back to it. Others, 6 months to a year, but it is pretty draining. And I think one of Jack Ketchum, who wrote some really wonderful but dark books, spoke on writing from the wound and getting as personal as you can, and writing the book that from something personal that is the most vivid way to explore your writing. So and I find times when I write alone in the dark and get it out of my system, and then can move on. So it's in that sense, it's therapeutic, and it'd be great to make a living out of it, but the fact that it's a hobby also means I can write whatever I want, so I don't have to make a dime,
Yeah, you got a little bit of freedom in that. You're not worrying about selling a certain amount or making a certain amount of money or, pleasing some crowd or something. Yeah.
Yep.
But do people and how they respond to what you do, is that very important to you? Like when you're putting together, like when the Hobgoblin, when it comes out, is it really important that it's received well and people like it, or you get good feedback? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Are you kind of writing for that side of it?
I think I want people to respond and relate to it. And I think to paint something and have it not be seen is like, it's a tree falling in the forest. If nobody reads it, nobody sees it, does it really exist? I mean, obviously, I wanted to please myself first, but I think to be read is really important, and that's one of the joys of being an independent publisher is I can, I can give away copies, I can price it to sell and spread the word. So yeah, I mean, it is important that it's received well and that it's read, so that that it's worth the time. I would do it if there was one reader. So but I think it is pretty important. So
yeah, it's kind of one of those things because I some things I just write for myself and I don't care, but yeah. It's good if you do get some feedback for sure.
Yeah, and I've been getting some pretty good feedback so far, but you always get in fact, one of my first horror novels, On the Lips of Children, I have a mix of some that have been published for various places, but that was the first one where I said, I'm writing a horror novel, and really my second novel. And it got some great feedback, but except for one person, or a couple people, but one person said, the writer is obviously a psychopath, and so is everyone who gave this novel 5 stars.
Oh boy.
Well, I mean, in a way, isn't that kind of a...
You can't buy publicity right there, right? Yeah, that's bad. So
I think if you do something so well in a particular area, if you're very specific and you really hit the nerve, and it will be just as pleasing to some people as hateful to another, but that's hitting the nerve, and I think that's important. It's the really polarized artist that really does the job, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference or something like that, right? I mean, if you're going to hate it, that's at least a strong emotion versus, I forgot that book. What was that about? So.
Yeah. Well, it isn't the fact usually when someone's that extreme, where they're saying this is awful and anybody that likes it is awful, and they start getting to that, when they're that extreme, isn't it the what you're writing about that's awful to them more than the writer itself?
Yeah. I mean, if you put it down and couldn't read it because the writing was terrible, that's one thing. But if it's the content that's striking you, so
yeah, if it's that important to you that it causes that kind of an emotion, and you'll actually go to a computer and start thrashing it out, I would think that's a compliment.
Yeah, I guess I was bragging by saying it.
Yeah, you braggadocious. No, I just how I take it. I think it's the middle of the road ones that kind of would bother me more than, the 1 star and the 5 star are great. And the 3 stars are kind of like, oh, or the 2 stars. And you're kind of like, well, what was wrong with it?
Yeah.
I guess that's because you grow as a writer, right? And there's going to be parts that maybe, some people are better writers. I don't know. I get depressed. So, so where do you see yourself going with all of this? Do you want to continue writing these kind of subjects and go further? Yeah,
I've been putting together these anthologies of I've had 2 of them at least, addiction horror basically, and that's based on my own experience and based on I've worked a lot in substance abuse treatment and have my own personal experience. Garden of Fiends is one, and Lullabies for Suffering is another. And basically, I invited other writers to write on the subject, and really people have taken to it because it's such a subject that's ripe for discussion. So I that's something that interests me, and I have a lot of short stories that I've published. I know I do plan to keep on doing it. It's exhausting every time you're done, of course, and you think, I can't do this again, and then something happens. I'm thinking of I watched that movie Shirley about Shirley Jackson, and she just finished a novel, and she quietly said, this one hurt more than the others, or something to that effect, and you could just feel the emotional exhaustion. So right now I'm kind of at that point, but give me 30 days from now, and I'll probably have something else in the works. And
it comes back.
What's that? I'm sorry.
It comes back.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Just recovery. Do you feel vulnerable putting this stuff out?
I did at first, but I guess I published a novel, and my family didn't even know for the longest time, because I didn't want them to know and read it. In fact, they don't know this one's coming out that close to one, but it's just it's easier to know when your mom's not going to read your book, but they did eventually. A lot of times family members read it and say, I want to see if I'm in there. So, it is, it's pretty vulnerable, but it's not necessarily first person, but it is, it's not just, I shouldn't say just, but it's not just a fun story. It's usually some deep matters. Had a couple books that were like Milk, Blood, and All Smoke Rises, that were based on a 10 or 11-year-old girl that got addicted to heroin after her uncle started injecting her, and then some supernatural elements happen. And some of it was based on, I worked as a social worker, and I would do some home visits downtown Detroit, and I would see some of the poverty and talk to some folks, and it was actually understated in the book, but people are like, oh my gosh, all the poverty. I'm like, well, it's worth
Go
it.
there. Yeah. Go down Detroit. Have at her, boy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, addiction seems to be really important to you. I mean, it's something you've been through. What do you think the biggest misunderstanding about addiction is in popular kind of mainstream society? Like, what do you think everyone gets wrong?
Great question. I think the concept of what it is to crave a substance, that what it's like in your body and your mind and your soul, and how deep it is, and to tell someone in the throes of a craving not to use is the intensity of it. And especially when somebody is freshly out of detox or something, or just freshly sober. I don't think that certain folks can understand what goes on in someone's head and their body at that moment. It's not a moral failure at that moment. I do think that we're responsible to take care of ourselves once we know what we know, and to not use. But it's not as simple as putting down that potato chip. So,
well, I mean, do you think that there's kind of a negative, there's a connotation to it that it's not that you are less than
mm-hmm.
an average person. So, oh yeah, no, he was an addict. Ooh, do you feel like that's still there in society?
I think it's there, but I really think it's lessening. And in some ways, I think the opiate crisis has, since it's caught up so many families, I think it has started to change some things. And I do think there's more understanding and empathy because of so many people have died from it. I'm thinking of one of my most favorite addiction stories, Beautiful Boy. Is it David Sheff? I think Nick Sheff's his son, who wrote about some of the challenges families face and kids face, young addicts. So I do think there's a lot of changing perceptions over addiction right now.
What do you think? What advice would you give to someone if they had a family member or a friend that was having an addiction problem to a substance? What do you think the best piece of advice is there?
Wow. Well, I think that it's not a matter of how much that person loves you that's going to get them clean, meaning although it may help, but your husband, your son, your whoever it might be is not using because they don't love you kind of thing. It's that will help get them clean having that, but it's not to not personalize that. Going back to the intensity of a craving, I think, because that goes out the door when you're in the middle of a addiction craving.
Hey, so when things like I look at this last year and all of the controversy and all the upheaval going on, does that darkness get into your writing as well?
I don't necessarily.
Well, you might not write it direct. You're not going to incorporate, let's say, a COVID or a nutball president. You're going to incorporate necessarily something. But what I'm saying is when that's going on around you, because for myself, it causes a lot of different effects in my writing and even radio, like things I'm doing. It has an impact. I was just wondering, I ask a lot of writers this, how do you feel it's impacted your writing?
Yeah, and instead of doom scrolling, because it's I saw somewhere. I know I'm doom scrolling, but have you seen the quality of the doom lately?
Yeah.
I think I don't know if I don't have to think about that. I almost might do the opposite because it almost like maybe I'm like I need a relief from it. But on the other hand, I'm like, well, of course I write horror. How can you write right now and not write horror?
Well, no, I hear both. I mean, different writers say either they seem to be, I go completely opposite because I want to get out of this world, so I complete a fantasy and get into it, or either they totally get depressed and it totally influences their writing. It seems to be one or the other. Yeah,
I think that I always find something that usually darkens my situation, even though like I said, I mean when I go about my day, I have plenty of joy in my and jokes and this tone doesn't necessarily hit me 24 hours, or when it comes out, I think it always comes out to kind of the level of the doom in the country right now. Although there is some redemption at the end of my works, I think there's usually some sense of redemption or open-endedness where the story's not complete and there's a chance for redemption.
Well, and I know for myself, like, we deal with a lot of shows and writers that are writing dark subjects, whether it's true crime, murder, serial killers, or the horror writing and things like that. And I know for myself, I like to make jokes and it's kind of a comic relief. And I think even Mike's that way. And there's different people I work with that are that way. And sometimes that's, do you find yourself doing that?
Yeah, I think, well, back to what you were saying, I looked at some of your works and see, that would scare me more than writing fiction. I can't handle, and I'm not answering your question, but I can't handle true crime very much. Like, I don't like watching true crime. I don't like hearing about true documentaries and like on Netflix that are true. That is what I'm more scared of than I am of a horror story that is kind of the internal landscape put in a metaphor of a monster of some sort. But to hear of something that's actually happening, that is a lot harder for me to deal with. So I avoid the reality in that sense.
I've heard that. People have said that to me before.
Yeah.
You're not the first. And I feel that way myself.
Oh, okay.
There's complete times where I'm just not in the mood. There's just, I'm over it. And I can go months without being involved in it, and I'm fine with it. But, it's an unusual category. And I keep telling myself this is the last crime book I'll ever write.
Okay, yeah, because crime will be over, right?
Well, no, I just figure, that's it. I've had enough.
You got to get out of it, yeah.
Let's get into something else. Let's try writing whatever, and think
about heroes, right? Or something.
Yeah, and it just never happens.
Uh-huh.
I think you kind of get caught into, I don't know, maybe you just do what you do, and it's just, I'm not sure. Do you write to
music? I was looking at your back. I was curious. Are you writing to music with your music background?
No.
Okay. I was going to ask what kind, but
no.
Okay.
I mean, music's been a big part of my life, but it doesn't get involved in my writing other than I have it around me a lot, so it creates a mood. But no, nothing like that.
Okay.
I'm kind of insane, so it's hard to it's hard to figure out what I'm doing.
Kind of.
Kind of, yeah, that's true. You see, and the editor keeps telling me, don't be so passive, because I always when I want to say something, I always do like, it seems to be, or kind of, or, and it's like, no, get rid of that word. It is.
Out. It is. Yep.
Yeah. So that's my latest. I'm facing it.
Insane, in other words.
Yeah. They're calling me a pussy is what they're doing. But so what do you like? So I always like asking this of horror people. I totally love the old horrors, some of the originals like Dracula, Frankenstein, and whether it's movies or books. And I've been listening to some of them, and I think they're so well done as compared to modern day. Modern day ones have a lot more. I don't know. There's just so much. There's more graphics, but less story. What do you like better? Like what do you think is?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on a lot of the classics in terms of the Christopher Lee and the House on Haunted Hill and watching In Detroit with Sir Graves Ghastly and I mean some recent movies that Hereditary just blew me away and still does, things like that, or The Relic, where there's I think what better way to tell a story of grief or of cold family dynamics than through a work of horror. I think those were done really well. The Lodge is another one that was done recently. One not very well-known one is, well, maybe well-known, Sea Fever. It's a more independent one, but it was one of those written about the pandemic before the pandemic, like Paul Tremblay's Survivor Song. But it's an example I think of how some stories to tell, if you use horror, they're just told in a more powerful way than otherwise. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of things that people sometimes love a movie, and I'm just like, I can't get into that, but I'm not gonna hate it. So,
yeah, no. I mean, it's just that you can watch and read all that stuff, but I'm just wondering if something sticks with you. That's something you'd watch again or you'd read more than once, and kind of in that area is what I was kind of aiming at.
I get it. Yeah, the Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, that with Luke's story and everybody's story, and I thought that was amazing. Mary Ann was really good, and was it a French translation? Yeah, it's easy to get wrapped up into binge watching things and not spending time with the family or everything else. But
I caught something really interesting to me when you say there's no better way to tell about family dynamics than through horror. How do you mean that? Explain that to someone that's.
Explain that to your mom who's listening.
Yeah, explain that to your family now. No, I was thinking more for me, because I'm trying to figure out. So it's really not so much about the horror or the events as it is about the dynamics of the family that comes out horrific. Like I'm trying to play with that in my mind and understand it.
I mean, I think that's where all our wounds come from, but I also think that's where we rely on for everything as well. So, it really shapes who we are. It's that first kind of psychological imprint. So when we, we're hurt or we're, seeking something, that's kind of our backbone. And maybe that's just me, but I think that is, and obviously, I'm thinking of like, movies like Ordinary People or that share what happens in a family, or The Marriage Story is an example, a more recent example, where the horror is not made into a genre, but it's still there. The horror of being distanced from those you love or being hurt, and the coldness. I think in that sense, horror can just be kind of magical realism, where it just takes it and exaggerates it to the point of supernatural or monstrous, and things we battle every day anyway, but kind of given a face.
So when you say you have redemption too, like so when I read one of your books, I'm going to turn out at the end of it, I'm going to be happy.
You won't be totally like, oh my gosh, hopeless. Let's put it that way.
I'm not going to slit my wrists and go in the bathtub.
Didn't Jack Ketchum say this book will hurt you about?
No, that quote that he gave me after reading All Smoke Rises. He said, Mark Matthews is a wonderful writer, and make no mistake, he will hurt you. That was, I met him at one of the horror writers conferences, and so many writers will tell you what a great influence he was, because you knew how great he could write, but he just was such a mentor to people. And here's the other thing I should add, is that I have a hard time when most horror writers I meet are wonderful people, and if I find out they're not, then I have a hard time reading their books. Like, I need to know that this isn't how you want the world to be, what you're writing, that you're actually a cheerful, happy person. And my take is that a lot of writers are just kind of fragile to being hurt, so they put it on the page versus they want to hurt people. Right. That makes sense.
But I think that's sort of the sign of the times as well. There seems to be this real, I don't know if it's part of that cancel culture, like they call it, where it's the idea of, you find out someone's really awful, and so it's hard for you to read their books or watch their movies or whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah. I've come across that. I've interviewed people that have been absolute horrible people that I thought were really good when I've seen them on TV, and I was a fan, my nipples were hard. And then you talk to them and it's like, holy, this has got to be the worst person in the world.
Or yeah, you find out somebody played, like, say an actor played a character, like, a villain, and then you're like, wow, that was amazing. But if they're like that in real life, then suddenly it's a little less appealing.
Yeah, it's like, ooh.
When Randy Quaid plays a crazy person, it's cute until you see that that's what he's doing in real life.
Until they're in your basement, yeah.
Or in your gutter, the shitter full, right?
Yeah, it's just, I just think that, but I think that's sort of the sign of the times right now. People, because I find myself doing it without thinking about it. It just automatically happens. Mm-hmm. And it becomes hard for you because you get the image of who they are in your mind, and it's I don't know. That's something I've been dealing with as well. I've got a lot of problems,
Well, that's why we're here, right?
Yeah. I have a lot of hours to work out. I have a lot of.
Perfect.
This is not an easy job.
Yeah,
it's crazy. It's crazy. So when at the end of the day, what does your book give you when you write a book? What is it? What do you think it gives you at the end of the day?
I think it's kind of a reflection of how I see the world, and stories of real people, things that people really experience. And hopefully someone, reads it and gets the message and kind of learns the truth about themselves or, the world that they live in by learning about somebody else and, learning about yourself. And beyond that, a creative expression. I think I'm 50 now, so I need something to say, instead of getting a Corvette, I write these things out. Yeah.
So you're saying I'm the Hobgoblin?
A Hobgoblin is foolish consistency. It's where you do things the same way over just because it's how they've always been done. But and in the book, though, the doctor manipulates that to make excuses for doing some pretty awful things. Yet she's a sympathetic character. So.
Wow. So So you think that the do you have a villain in your book then?
In this one, there is a bad guy, so to speak, but who, as in many villains, he's the hero of her own story, meaning, she sees herself as being heroic, and you can understand some of the choices she's making based on what she's been through. that said, there is a couple books where, there's just, there's some pretty rotten people. So, yeah, I mentioned Milkblood, the uncle who, shoots up a niece of his who's 11 years old, and and I play that out in a way that you can see it happening and does happen. Or On the Lips of Children, it's about a couple stuck in a drug tunnel, and then they kidnap people, and there's a couple people in there that are definitely villainous. So.
So now, for a person that's new to your books, which one would you want them to read?
Let me. I think that my newest one is probably the best written. As the person, Julie Hutchings, give her a shout out, has edited a lot of my works. She seems to feel it's the best work, so let me go with that. But I think really starting anywhere, with All Smoke Rises is a sequel to Milkblood, so you probably start with Milkblood first. But
well, do you like to? Do you ever look back at your writing, like the very first book you've written, now, and kind of go, "I wished I could redo that"? Yeah, definitely. I'll read a sentence. I'm like, this sentence could have been rewritten this way. But I'm sure that I will think the same thing about the book I just wrote, 5 years from now. But they say what a book is never finished, and you don't want the perfect to be an enemy of the good, or is that the other way around? I don't know. Yeah. Well, there's a total progression, right? I mean, we can, as we go further, we learn and get better, and that's sort of how it goes. And get more confident, I think, to just put stuff out there that maybe you weren't is it never being afraid to go there kind of mentality. I think that it's easier to do if you have a couple of books under your belt. Do you think the story is more important than the actual wording? I think the prose could get in the way of the story. But if you don't notice the prose, that's a good thing sometimes, because then you're just telling the story. Meaning not to be too flowery, but I think the story, I think the characters, I think we need, a good premise, but what's the character doing? I mean, Hunger Games, I'm thinking we think of Katniss, right? We don't think of, this dystopia. It's more what Katniss went through. So. Yeah. So now, do you have a website, or do you have a place that you want people to come stalk you? It's wickedrunpress.com if you want to look. And that's, I publish some of my own books. I've published some anthologies with other writers. I've had some with other publishers as well, but Wicked Run Press. And I'm happy to contact people. I can return emails usually pretty quick. And, so yeah, check that out. Or I'm on Twitter raging about something or other often. I'm on Instagram. Oh, you're one of those. Yeah, yep. Once in a while I mix them up. Yep. Oh, just get in there and start fighting with people. That's right. In fact, I think I told the story about, I'm going to be on this radio show, but I don't really like my voice. And oh, please. I told the story of how even when I proposed to my wife, I did it by writing. I wrote like one chapter at a time, and one page, one chapter, and gave it to her like every day on a vacation in Colorado. And I didn't even want to, speak that. No, your voice is fine. All right. It's just fine. If it was bad, I wouldn't run it. So no, it's fine. things are good. Delete this whole thing. Yeah, just bye. Well, it's been a pleasure, and we're going to have your book up on our website as well. Oh. And we'll connect to your website as well. And, right. Okay, our guest has been Mark Matthews. Thank you for being here. Alan, Mike, have a great day.
Thanks, Mark.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.